The Smiling Human podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you would like to experience more of these shows into the future, then please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. My name is Oak, and I'm your host. Today is a special episode as it marks this series' first trialogue. That's right, I have two guests today, that being Nick Palladino-King and Nitin Garg. Allow me to tell you a little bit more about each of them. Nick Palladino-King is a CCC. This is a certified conscious executive. He's also a leadership and life coach who transforms and accelerates physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual success. His expertise comes from over 15 years of training and teaching movement, breathwork, meditation, coaching, and entrepreneurship. He's known as a coach's coach and is sought after for his honesty, ability to hold non-judgmental space, and transformational and healing presence. He coaches world-class athletes, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and conscious leaders worldwide. As for Nitin, he leads an integral leadership coaching practice anchored around an individual's determination to realize their full potential. He loves to have deeply authentic conversations with people that wake them up to their mission in life, and he helps these people break past inhibitions and fears so they can truly bring into the world that which only they can. Together, they host the Conscious Conversations podcast, of which I had the privilege of being a guest on earlier this year. It might be 2 years ago now. These two brothers are deeply inspiring, not only for their dedication to growth and their service, but also their genuine and open hearts. I hope you enjoy our conversation today as much as we had making it. Beautiful, brothers. It's such a pleasure to have you here on the Smiling Human podcast. And I want to open the show with the question that I ask each guest, and it's going to be a little different because there's two of you here, but what is the last thing that made each of you smile?
I can go first. It was very recent, actually. Took my son to his first football game last night at the Levi Stadium here in the Bay Area. And he had no idea. He's recently really gotten into football, and I made all kinds of excuses to like get us close to the stadium. And then he's like, "Oh, that's so cool! There's a game going on." And then when I broke it to him that we're gonna go walk in and watch the game, he was like, "Oh!" So that definitely truly brought a smile to my face because I knew how much it meant to him.
That's rad. Excellent. Core memory unlocked.
Yeah,
that's rad. I mean, for me, that question made me smile, which is very cool. And Nitin, you sharing that too, also. Man, what made me smile? I'm thinking of last week. I was out with a good friend and having dinner and hanging out and talking, and just the childlike banter and the childlike play and conversations we had with each other. That really made me smile, and just cracking up at the bar, not even drinking, and just being in joy with each other is what's coming to mind for me.
That's so rich. I love it. There's so much benefit that I get, and it, allow me to be selfish for a moment, but every time I have a guest or guests on and I get to hear these little moments of joy and gratitude, and it really starts to paint a picture of the pieces that are meaningful. And one of the core things that comes through all the time is people talk about the relationships. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, your son Nitin or your friend Nick, it's like, it's all coming through how we relate to one another, and bringing that level of openness and receptivity, I think, is really key. And I know we spoke about this before we started recording, and the listeners would have had a little bit of a longer intro, so we're not going to get too deep into the stories here. But speaking about this openness and this joy, those two components seem to be, I would call it, the perfume of a inner quality of awareness or an inner quality of consciousness that when we begin to cultivate, we start to see joy in all of these different things, right? Oh, there's joy in the little moments driving with my family. There's joy when I see the birds outside my window. And there's almost like this well opens up and the flow comes through.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll pitch this out here, and maybe we can talk more on the personal level, because I think this is what's really resonant and accessible for people. In this journey coming to joy and gratitude and this more alivened presence in life, was there a turning point, like a really memorable point where that started to flow more powerfully for each of you? And then we can sort of bounce off of that.
Mm.
Well,
When
the
this,
first thing that I'd like to bring in there is, just, as you're talking about joy, and I actually said it a while ago, if anyone caught it, was I find to be in joy, I have to do things that I'm enjoying. And to me, that play on words right there is really important. So I find joy when I'm in joy. So that could be through a conversation like this, through play, through movement, through deep conversation. So I'm finding the more and more I grow that when I'm in a space of doing things that I love, doing things that I'm passionate about, that's actually where the most amount of joy flows from. And then that can lead to a sense of connecting to purpose, which then connects to a sense of prosperity. I would call it the 3 Ps: passion, purpose, and prosperity. And those kind of, for me, have all flown into one another, and really like lean on one another and build on one another. So I find if I'm doing things I like, if I'm doing things I'm passionate about, then I develop this sense of deep purpose and reason for being alive. And then that leads to a prosperous life of health, wealth, peace, happiness, abundance. So for me, it is, it's really being present with things that I'm really excited about. And when I'm not as excited, that's when I notice those other things start to fade, and they're not as present, and they're not in the forefront. So that's something I've really worked on the last couple of years, is living with a sense of joy and happiness, no matter what's happening.
yeah, that's beautiful, Nick. It's hard to pin down a specific moment, Oak, but I know it was, for me, there was a major shift when I began to ask a different question to myself. And it was probably somewhere around my college time. I can't remember exactly when, but there was a shift that happened where, instead of focusing on what I don't want in life, or what is painful, and focusing on that, I started to ask the question of what do I want? And then the answer was clear. Okay, I want health, I want joy, I want happiness, I want love. And then as I started to say that, I was like, okay, great. So if that's what I want, how do I need to show up, and what do my actions need to be like in order for joy, health, abundance, happiness, all of these things to show up in my life? So that became and it was, I know for me personally, it was that shift of the question of, instead of focusing on what I don't want in life, which is fine, we do need to be aware of the things we don't want in life. But these days, I'm finding myself telling my clients this more and more too, is like, great, I hear you, what's not working. What do you want? Let's actually spend 80-90% of our energy on recognizing and creating what we actually want. And then all the other outcomes underneath, they sort of start to flow naturally.
And how often have you heard a client say, I've never thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, what's your goal? And it's this lightning moment of like, I haven't thought about that before. We get so stuck in the past. And just to piggyback on that, I'm thinking, to your question, Oak, of what moment was it for me? It was actually a teaching that I learned in a yoga training maybe 7-8 years ago. And it's around the 4 desires of the soul. And the 4 desires of the soul would be, one would be artha, which is your tool. You've got kama, which is joy. You've got dharma, which is your purpose, and then moksha, which is freedom. And for me, I was convinced, or had this picture or this thought, that being a yoga teacher was my purpose. So that my artha was my dharma. And when I had a teacher lay that out for me and say, no, those aren't the same thing. Being a yoga teacher is a tool that you use that can help facilitate your dharma. To me, that was the unlock, because I was asking myself, like, I don't know if I want to be a yoga teacher. Why am I in this role? And for me, there was deep power in uncoupling those and understanding that what I do in my life for work or for service, isn't necessarily what I'm here to do on the planet. And when I was able to unpack those, it released me, and it made me a lot more open to say, oh, well, part of what I do for a tool could be conversations like this with you guys. Part could be a coach, part could be a teacher, and the other part could be a friend. And to me, that was an unlock, which then led to more moksha, more freedom in my own life and world. Yeah.
Potent things. Thank you for bringing in those 4 desires. I had not heard those before, although I recognized some of the words.
There's a great book out there, The 4 Desires of the Soul of Rod, from Rod Stryker, who we actually had on our podcast recently, who's a world-renowned yoga teacher. That's a really good read for that.
Yeah.
Duly noted. 2 core pieces came out of the intersection of your shares that I think really illuminates the road to coming to this kind of awareness. And one is inquiry, Nitin, which you put forward very clearly. And the other is recognition. Because, when the client or self or anyone doesn't recognize where they find the value in their lives, they inevitably end up unoriented. And this is an idea that I've really been grappling with and toying with in a little bit different than a yoga teacher training. I've been working with the idea that our story, our collective story, myth and symbol and language, they offer us the power of orientation. And it seems too that inquiry is capable of doing this as well. And what I want to add one layer to that as well is that if someone doesn't know what brings them joy or what makes them feel passionate or what their purpose is, the body works as a brilliant compass. And when I am working with clients, when I've encountered people who don't have an answer to that question, what are you aiming at? They're like, oh, I don't know. Like, okay, when do you feel happiest? When do you feel lightest? When do you feel most energized? And that's the body is going to be responding to those kinds of situations before the mind even recognizes it. And it offers this opportunity for orientation. And orientation is crucial for anyone who, I believe anyways, anyone who wants to live a fulfilling life, because that fulfillment comes when there is not a single, but a meaningful direction that we can pursue towards something, towards authenticity, towards fulfillment, towards purpose, what have you. So those are some of the pieces that came through when I was listening to you guys.
Yeah, I love that. The body doesn't lie. And that was something Nitin and I were talking about recently on another episode, was around listening to our minds, our hearts, and our guts, and really putting those through an alignment of what are all 3 of those saying. And we all know sometimes the mind is telling us all these crazy things, but if we slow down, the heart and the gut really are clear on what they want or what they don't want. And you can get into that space of, oh, is this a hell yes or a hell no? Or is this a maybe? And your mind, I don't know about you guys, I find my mind will just spin. And once it starts spinning, it's like, man, that ship has sailed. I'm not figuring out this problem. Like, the mind is trying to fix the problem the mind made. And I'll say to myself, when I think, I stop. And I think that's hinting at what you're talking about, Oak, of when I'm thinking, I stop. And what do I start doing? Getting into the body, because it doesn't lie. It's super honest with you. And we all know it, but I think we all want to deny it too. We think that the mind is the end all be all, it's like the Wizard of Oz. It's like, man, it's a tool, and it can be quite limiting. And probably the majority of our pain and suffering comes from our mind, not from our body. So I'm totally with you. Feel into it. What am I feeling? What am I knowing?
We're in such an era where I think the mind is so overemphasized, right? And for some good reasons, of course, as well, because there's the intellect, and we can think through really difficult problems, and all the science that we're surrounded with, and the technology that's, especially here in the Bay Area, it's overwhelming, the amount of technology, especially these days with AI and everything that's happening, right? So there is this major emphasis on the mind and the capabilities of the mind, because we see all the results of it. And at the same time, alongside that, there's been a neglect of the body, where people often view the mind as the most supreme thing to take care of, and this body is just, it's just like, I'm kind of just getting by, like it's sort of auxiliary. And what you're pointing at, Oak, is beautiful, and something that we need to really raise the awareness around is that no, actually, it's all one system. And this is where people get mightily confused because they think that all noble answers come from the mind. And the mind is just a tool for us to be able to differentiate and analyze and decipher. That's why the mind is good at pros and cons of everything. It doesn't hold the final answer. It can tell you logically, maybe from a certain angle, like, okay, financially, this is the best answer. Or like, if I want the most power, this is the best answer. Or if I want X, this is the best answer, right? The mind can analyze a situation and get us to that. But if we're talking about our work of the soul and what is truly aligned and our purpose and what's going to be most meaningful in our lives, that doesn't come from the mind. That comes from the other parts of our being, the heart, the gut, this whole spinal intelligence, right? All the chakras, all the energy centers here. The more we have access to those, the more clear it becomes what our dharma is, what our purpose is. And then I say, then use your God-given mind to execute towards it intelligently. If maybe it's in your cards to quit your job, but it doesn't have to be. Maybe you have all the money in the world and you can afford to do that. Great. If you don't, then use your mind to execute towards your dharma strategically, right? So I think people need to realize that the mind is a tool, and we have other higher intelligence centers in the body that maybe we do have access to them today. If so, amazing. If you don't, they can be cultivated, and then you can have more clear access to your heart and your other energy centers, so you know what is it that is truly calling to you.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing in the chakras there, Nitin, as well, of really getting into these different energy centers and places of knowingness and lenses in which we can activate ourselves in the world. And then I'm even hearing this sense of beyond the mind. That's where the purpose and the dharma lives, and it's as we actually calm the mind, calm the fluctuations of the mind, as they say in yoga. That's when we actually hear what's called buddhi, which would be intellect, or di, which would be source. And that's when we actually start to connect to, oh, how do I know this? I don't know this, but I know this. How do I know that my next step is to do this? It's like, well, source told me that, not from mind, but from source. And there's a relationship that needs to be cultivated there as well. I noticed when that first started happening for me, I would doubt it. Wow, what is this? I don't know if this is true. Where's this coming from? And we get so good at doubting ourselves and so good at saying, nah, that's not real. It's like, no, it is real. And there's a relationship then that gets built with trusting your body, your energy centers, and your connection to source. And Nitin's totally right. The mind's job is to kind of come in and say, no, you sure about that? Here's the pro, here's the con. And that in itself is duality, which is limited. And that's really important. The mind, as great as it is limited by duality. So we've got to get to these other places and spaces of connection if we want to expand into different realities. And I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed the clients I've worked with that are the most intelligent, they have some of the most struggles. Like they're almost too smart for their own good. And what I've noticed about you, Oak, is you're a very unique blend of highly intelligent and highly emotionally intelligent. And that's very rare to see. But the clients that we all have that are so smart, it's like you got to almost dumb them down a little so that they can then start to not rely on the mind so much. And that there's an unlearning that happens with that project as well.
Thank you, Nick. That was a very generous reflection. I'm reminded of a quote by Stephen Herod Buhner. He was actually quoting somebody else in this thing, so it's a quote of a quote. But it's something like, the mind is not just embrained, but it is embodied. And when we take that idea that the mind is embodied and not just embrained, we start to touch on the idea that there's multiple minds. There's the thinking mind, there's the heart mind, and then there's the instinctual mind. And that each of these, like you mentioned, the energy centers speaks to that. We can divide them down into 7 or into the 108 minor centers. There's all of these different points or voices or qualitatively different, but I would say characteristically different, but qualitatively same, because it's one whole system, voices that are all directing us towards an inner harmony. And I'm also reminded of when we bow, if we're doing namaste, we lower the mind to the heart. And when you talk about the mind as a tool, this is exactly that. And I coach on this as well. And I try to put this into practice in my own life. You're right. I have worked a lot to develop my intellect, and I read a lot, and I think a lot, and I write a lot. And in so doing, I have discovered the very real limits of the thinking mind. I cannot get to the places of joy, of peace, of wisdom through reason, because the heart has reason that reason knows not. And so there's a necessity to surrender and to almost be supplicant, to say, I will put all of my faculties of keen-eyed, clear vision, reason, intuitive download, whatever it is that I've got gifted with, in service to a wisdom that is non-dual. Right? This is the key piece. Even when we look at the architecture of the brain, we have two hemispheres. They're talking, well, we have more than two lobes, but two halves in that kind of sense.
Yeah.
We have the sense of self and other that is built into the different architecture of the brain that the heart just does not have. The heart's like, every time it looks at somebody, we're activating mirror neurons, we're resonating in this heart space. We have this capacity to be in unity. And I think this introduces a new pathway of conversation, which is the power of community, the power of coming into union, if it's sangha or if it's in intimate partnerships, soul level relationships, even with clients and mentors. The necessity and power of existing in a harmonious relationship almost gives birth to that unity to be realized. So that was some of the pieces that came through.
Yeah, beautiful. This is something actually I'm leaning myself into further as my own growth edge, is this sense of community and coming into community with and recognizing the reasons for why we come into community. I'm actually reading a beautiful book right now, which I just started, so I don't have a ton of wisdom to quote, but it's called The Art of Gathering. Why we come together and how to create beautiful gatherings. That's something I'm leaning into. But one of the things I realized, Oak, just in my own journey, why I ended up down this path of working with people in this really intimate, deep, one-on-one way. That's where I found true community. I feel like two hearts could really open up, be vulnerable, be really honest about their experience of life, the triumphs and the challenges. And something I recognized in my own journey in my corporate days was I was the guy who never ate at my desk. I was always booking a lunch with someone. It's just that the thought of eating at my desk and doing, nonstop work was just not comprehensible to me, not acceptable to my heart. So my heart, my brain was like, there's work. My heart was like, no, we got to take this 1 hour and do something different. So I would always meet with someone for lunch. And I'd have lunches booked out months in advance on my calendar because I'd always be reaching out and booking stuff. And I realized later on, I was like, oh, snap. That was me back in my corporate days, meeting the same need I had for this deep, personal, intimate connection, but I was doing it in a different way. Now I can do it and make a living while doing it as well. But that didn't come about until much later. So this
double dip.
Yeah. Eventually, sometimes, your artha and your dharma can come together in some ways, right? And then they'll drift away and reshape and reform because that's the nature of our life. But I really feel this there is a different desire that's held at the level of the heart that is very core to who we are.
You talking about your heart in the corporate space really lands for me. And Nitin, you know the story, but 15 years ago, I left my corporate career, and it was because my heart told me I was done. My mind was going back and forth and hemming and hawing, and I was at my computer one day and I was typing, and my heart said, stop. It literally said, no more, like, where you are, we are not doing this. And that was the moment I needed to break free from the corporate world that I was stuck into and still wanting to get out of. But it was this guy that said, no more, we're done. And it wasn't until that happened that it took control over my body and stopped. And the other thing that's landing for me, Nitin, is I have a health and wellness studio with hundreds of members, and it's a 7-figure business, and I have staff and I have all this community, but I've started to feel lonely in a way because I've moved away from doing one-on-one personal deep work with clients. And that is actually starting to get loud inside me of wanting to come back in. And there's something about you use this word, Nathan, the intimacy of being connected to someone at a heart level and in the deepest way that our souls are able to. And so even though I have this big community in Sangha that I've helped facilitate and grow over the last 7 years, what my heart's actually calling for is a one-on-one, deeper, more intimate connection. And kind of like you were saying, I'm not talking about getting rid of what I have, but talking about now, what are some things I need to bring in with the need with a capital N from a state of soul level. And what my soul is asking for is more one-on-one, intimate, deep and meaningful conversations, much like we're having here. So that's very interesting that all of those things can be happening at the same time as well. And for each of us, I think what I'm hearing is community may look different and feel different, and that's okay. And to lean into that and understand what your body's asking for. Oh, I had this big community, no, but I want intimacy, or I want connection, or I want really vulnerable conversations. And that's where you can feel into what you need and what you want.
Yeah. There's one thing, there's two things actually I want to add just to round out this bit that we're talking about. One, it may sound like we're dissing the corporate world. We are not. I think it actually can be an amazing driver of good in the world, as it can be bad too. It's just it's another tool. It's a highly effective tool of deploying capital and getting resources and people focused on something. If your heart, mind, soul is aligned with the purpose of a company and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, at least hopefully most of it, by all means, being in the corporate world can be amazing. And it can be, very fracturing if not done for the right reasons. So just want to make that clear for the listeners that there's nothing wrong with being in your corporate job. Just, over time, you want to move towards more alignment. And the second thing I wanted to say was Nick and I are sharing our stories here, but they are stories meant to help you recognize that you have your own story, right? We are inviting you into listening to your own heart. And this is the ways in which we found a way into our heart. So these might be ways in which you can also potentially find a way to your heart.
And listening to one's own heart is the first step to being able to share it authentically. And it seems to me that the authenticity that flows from that is a necessary precursor to the intimacy that you're talking about, Nick. And so I'd put this to you both. What have you seen as some of the common blocks that people experience to that kind of authenticity and vulnerability that allows for intimacy to take place?
Interesting you asked that question. I put up a post yesterday on my social that said, I'd rather you not like me for who I am than like me for who I think you want me to be. That feels, and I'm using that word on purpose, that feels like the portal in of these masks, where I was talking with my therapist the other day, the masks of masculinity that we wear of, I'm okay, I've got this, and Oak's doing the same thing, and Nithin's doing the same thing, and then none of us are actually truly engaging with one another. We're wearing these masks or these protective armors or shields, and it's, if we don't know ourselves, then how the hell can you guys get to know me, and vice versa, so that there's a deep vulnerability with oneself of turning inward and loving oneself and accepting oneself. And then there's a confidence to then show that to the world and present your authentic self or your real self. And then there's a vulnerability of being willing to be judged, being willing to be seen. And what you may find is there's way more freedom and way more joy and way more connection on the other side of that fear. And I'm actually finding that people will like you more if you're your authentic self. And maybe there's narratives in there that say that isn't true, but when you really show who you are, people go, man, I really like that person. I don't know what it is. They're different. So that's kind of the framework that I've learned through self-work and therapy and coaching. Nitin, how about you?
Yeah, I love that. Can you say that line again? I think it's worth repeating.
Yeah, and this line came to me from Source in meditation, by the way. This would be an example of listening. I'd rather you not like me for who I am rather than who I think you want me to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And so many of us are in the latter part of that sentence. And it almost feels like, actually, frankly, Nick's done a lot of work in the men's space and working with men and helping men open up. And actually, that's something we're contemplating right now. We may begin to do some more of that work, and feels very true, feels very aligned. And I see that all the time, this fake mask that we put up and pretend to be strong and pretend to ignore our emotions and pretend to not care, and we're just shutting ourselves down. It's like we're shutting down life inside us, and then at the same time catering to the like, oh, I've got to work this hard because the only way I earn my respect and my worth is through a promotion or through pleasing X, Y, and Z, or through accolades, etc. Those are all great, but again, just like what we were talking about earlier about the corporate world, if we're doing it from a place of inauthenticity, like it's not true to who we are and what we truly desire, then what are we really doing? We're, it's like we're going down a path to serve an intent or an outcome that at our core we don't really care about. It's like we're faking it to ourselves to some extent. And part of it is driven through fear. This fear of like, I come up against the fear all the time too. Geez, is this okay to say? Is this okay to express? Just like what Nick just shared. Like if he put it on his social, it's like, oh shit, like he's okay not being liked. And many people have a very difficult time with that piece of not being liked. They want to be likable to everyone. And in doing so, they lose themselves. And there's a distinction to be made. It doesn't mean that you have to be disrespectful to others, but it's just holding your ground. It's just, hey, this is who I am. This is what I believe. These are my preferences, and they may evolve over time, but this is my truest version of me today. Like my friends know, my really good friends, including Nick, they know that we could have a really, really difficult conversation, and they know I love them. Because just over the years, we've developed that level of trust, and in my inner circle, it's a thing that if we cannot be that authentic with each other, you're not in this circle. Like I can't handle fake people. I think that's the thing I get repelled from the most. The moment I sense like the tiniest bit of inauthenticity, I'm just like, okay, fine. Maybe I have to deal with this person, but they're not going to be in my circle.
Yeah, I'm reminded we had a tough, not a tough convo, but a real convo a couple weeks ago around our podcast, and I had said something, or I cut Nitin off or over talked or something, and Nitin goes at the end when we were offline, he goes, "Hey man, I didn't like that. That bothered me," and it was cool to be like, "Oh, well, tell me why. What happened? Okay, I can hear that." Rather than, well, I don't give a fuck. But it was like, yeah, tell me the truth. Like, great, now I know what works for you and what doesn't. I actually know where you're coming from and where your boundary is and where mine is. And what I'm thinking of, Nitin, as you're talking, is it's almost like we have this equation that we're told as children, like, do this, do this, do this, do this. Go to good school, get a good job, get married, get a dog, and you will be happy. And what I'm noticing in myself and others is they do this equation, especially the highly successful people, and they get to the bottom and they go, this equation didn't work. I'm not only happy, I'm unhappy and I'm miserable. And if you look at men, 70% of suicide is male. It's like there's reasons why this is happening. So what we're getting at here, and we can maybe bring in, is redesigning the equation for oneself of what is your equation for happiness or success or whatever you want to put at the bottom? And then that's the inquiry of, who am I? What do I want? Why am I here? Why don't I have it? We can ask those questions and we can make a new equation that we are actually the ones choosing for the first time in our life to put on there. And then we can get to the bottom and go, oh, does this work? Yeah. Oh, kinda. What do I need to tweak? I need to shift this. Does this work? Or to Nitin's point, it works right now. It doesn't mean it's going to work tomorrow. And that's a really conscious, engaged, present moment way of working with oneself of, what's my equation for what do I want? And then when I get there, great. Is it working? Is it not? If it's not, what do I change? If it is, carry on. And that's really important to get to when we're talking about what doesn't work. That can be a hell of a moment in life. I did everything and I'm unhappy. Good. Now you really know. I have a friend who's a multimillionaire, and he said to me one time, he said, Nick, people say all the time that money isn't the key to happiness. And he goes, but they don't actually know that for a fact. He goes, I know for a fact I have all the money I need, and I know that doesn't make me happy. And I remember being floored by that vulnerability and the honestness of, they don't know what they're talking about because they don't understand that I have all the money I need and I'm unhappy. And to me, that was a moment. You talk about Oak, of what opened me up, that share. I'm going, oh, if I had $1 million, I'll be fine. And he's going, trust me, from experience, you won't be.
Yeah. There's no substitute for the inner work. And, I'd say to people, it's like, build your financial foundation. By all means, make good money, be well off, be safe, secure,
Get your
have
house,
money
get your
for a
root in
rainy
order.
day. Yeah. Get your stuff, get your life in order. Yes. And that will enable you to be able to be with these deeper questions even more, but you will have to do the work even then. Right.
There's no escaping the work. That's for sure. And
we're all sounding like Byron Katie now. She talks about the work.
Yeah. Well,
Work's
they call
never
money
finished.
an amplifier.
Well, shit, then it doesn't work.
Yeah. I've been really thinking about this idea of money as an amplifier, and whatever is going on inside will just become amplified. The qualities of character, the quality of mind, everything just gets a little bit louder because money is an energy that allows us to amplify, express, or attract, or put out whatever it is that we have internally. And so some of the most powerful people, and I mean powerful for the good, are those who have clarified their intentions and worked on the quality of their character such that when they do come into wealth, the impact that they have in the world is reflective of their own ethic rather than something they came to, like, oh, I have $1 million. What do I want to do with it? It was this natural outflowing and sort of an expression of their natural being. But on the coattails of that, we'll take just a brief break, and then we'll come back with the second half of the show. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I wanted to take a brief moment to talk about just how you can help this show grow into the future. Did you know that we have an Instagram, a YouTube, and a Patreon? Probably. But if you're listening on YouTube, like many of you are, I would invite you to subscribe, to like this video if you've enjoyed it, and to leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you have any questions or maybe guests that you want me to interview. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music or any other podcast platform, then please take this moment to rate the show. All of these actions go a long way to helping the Smiling Human podcast reach more people and grow into the future. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Well, here we are with the second half of our show, which normally would be the question of the week, which is where I would ask our guest to bring forward an inquiry that's meaningful to them, something they want to share with the audience. But because we have two guests today, we're going to do something a little different. I have come up with a question for each of us to tackle in turn. And so, brothers, let us examine what makes a good life. You were speaking, Nick, earlier about an equation, if it's the house and the dog and the money and the wife and all of these things that don't end up producing happiness or fulfillment. Well, what does? And so I thought, let's each put one idea forward as a piece of the equation for a meaningful life. Maybe I'll start.
Yeah, please. Get us rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
great.
Would love to hear your thoughts.
My first piece would be honesty. Radical honesty is necessary. If we are to have any hope of experiencing positive emotion, meaningful relationships, intimacy, fulfillment, or success in any area of life, what it requires of us is that we are honest with ourselves, we are honest with the people in our lives, and we are honest about our mission and means of achieving that mission. The reason I emphasize this so strongly, not only in this conversation, but in all of the work that I do, is because I genuinely believe that value, the most important thing we could ever have, the thing that contributes to happiness, to fulfillment, to intimacy, value, is a branching from truth. And that when we commit to honesty, when we commit to truthfulness, we are committing ourselves to a relationship with the most powerful energy of the human spirit or of the natural universe as a whole. And that this has such a generative quality to it. It is harmonious, it is generative, it is abundant, and it is harmonizing in a way that even if we don't know what we're doing, even if we don't have a plan that goes from A, B, C, D, E, F all the way to Z, it will open and reveal itself so long as we are oriented towards and committed to that truth and that honesty. So that would be my contribution.
Love it. And it's so simple and succinct in one word. If anything, if I can add maybe just one dimension that was coming up for me to that was honesty, both with ourselves first, and then maybe focusing on honesty with others, because we can again go to the external first, be like, oh, I have to be honest with everyone else. Like, no, like start with yourself. Are we honest? But thank you for bringing that in. That's beautiful. I wrote it down. Something that's coming, what I would offer, this is just my own mantra that works for me, keeps me grounded, keeps me, it's like a daily centering exercise, a reminder of what I'm coming back to. It grounds my priorities, grounds mental focus, everything. And it's simply, it's part of a prayer that I do, but I basically say, thank you for helping me cultivate strength, love, and wisdom. And I'm pointing to the chakra: strength at the root, love at the heart, wisdom, the higher perception centers, so that I may fulfill my higher purpose in life. Thank you for blessing me with strength, love, and wisdom so that I may fulfill my higher purpose in life. And I say strength, really also referring to health. So our daily health regimen of eating right, exercising, getting the right amount of rest, sleep, all the essentials that enable this body to work at its very best. And I say body, frankly, me, to work at its very best. What am I talking about? And the second, love, because more and more, this is actually the part I was talking about this the other day, where I have sort of a return to love. As a kid, I was very sensitive, was very open, got hurt, got shut down. Now I'm opening back up. And the return to love, I'm noticing, is essential for fulfillment in how I show up with love for not only the people I agree and already love, which is essential. Let's at least just start there, love in the home, love with our kids, wife, our close friends, our neighbors. But then also ultimately, can I hold the space of love for those that I disagree and maybe even dislike? We had a conversation around empathy very recently where we dove deep into this, so that's very present for me. That's my growth edge. And then finally, wisdom, this, this sense of there's a higher knowing, higher intelligence. There is a purpose to everything. Everything in our life is happening for a reason. There's a lesson to be learned. There's something that's a message that's coming across to us. If we absorb it, we learn from it, we ourselves move into a higher dimension of our life. If we don't, the lesson keeps repeating itself. For me, wisdom tends to be studying teachers, that have themselves lived great, fulfilling lives, scriptures, great authors and books, all sources of wisdom that I don't necessarily have access to right away. So those tend to be the gateways that open up wisdom and thereby allow me to see beyond what I'm able to see today. So if I was to offer something, it'd be strength, love, wisdom.
Beautiful triad.
Really good. Really good. This is, it's reminding me of a technique I use, which is a self totem pole. And it can sound a little hierarchical, and it can be, but I think it's better if it's maybe horizontal. And one of those would be, Oak, what you were talking about is, you didn't say this, but integrity, and then Nitin talking about really talking about self-love and self-work, authenticity, connection, joy. Those would be on there. But for me, and it's hard to pick just one because we're multidimensional beings, and we all know that it's not just one thing that gets us there. But I would bring in two things. One is the ability to look in the mirror and love and respect the person that you see. And I don't think anything else fucking matters besides that. If you can look in the mirror and say, wow, I like this person, I love this person, yeah, they're a little crazy, and that's okay too, your life will unfold from there. And that can maybe sound a little selfish what I'm saying, but what I've realized is once you do that, then there's no other reason you won't reflect that externally. It's like once you learn to love yourself, you easily can love others. So that I would put that in there. Can you look in the mirror and are you happy with the person that you see? And if you're not, make some changes. If you are, carry on, lean into it. And then above that, for me, and this is personally my biggest totem, is freedom. And I brought in moksha before, but that sense of freedom in body, in movement, right? In freedom in the way we think, the way we express ourselves, what we do for work. Really, I guess what I'm talking about is being your own sovereign being and being the one that's fully empowered and engaged to decide how you want to live in the world. And there's so many things and there's so many people out there telling us this is what you should think, this is how you should be, this is what I would do. Who cares? I don't even know what I should do half the time. So who am I to tell someone what they should do? It's really truly connecting in. What is it that you want to do? Who do you want to be? More so, how do you want to be in the world? And then go live that and express that. And if you can do those things, the freedom that comes, and even I'm feeling into mental freedom, emotional freedom, physical freedom, spiritual freedom, they all bleed in together to a life that is free. And ultimately, when we're talking about freedom, moksha, we're talking about liberation. And we don't need to be enlightened beings in this samadhi state to experience that. The three of us all have touched that, and we all touched that, and we've all even touched it in this call, actually, being present. So for me, it would be ultimately a life that is free, in whatever way that looks for you in this moment, and it could change tomorrow. So yeah, freedom to me would be the ultimate one on the totem to experience. And to Nitin's point, I'm talking what works for me, and take it if it works. If it doesn't, try something else. I think that's what we're all getting at here too. These are what are tools, and listen and utilize and try them out.
Beautiful.
Don't put us on a pedestal or a hierarchy of what works. We're just sharing what works for us.
Yeah, the authority from which we speak is the authority over our own experience, not yours. I think freedom is a really interesting one because it blends also into the empathy point that you made, Nitin, and the bridge there is the idea of bondage, right? If we are free, then we are free from the bondage that keeps us, bound, or keeps us suffering, keeps us ignorant. And ignorance is the greatest of bonds, right? It's the heaviest of weights. It's the strongest of chains. And I'm reminded of you brought forward a mantra, Nitin, and here's the mantra I've been using recently. It's been snowing here in Canada, and when it snows, the driving gets perilous. And I learned to drive in the winter, so I'm very comfortable with it. Defensive driving, go slow. I'm very, very safe and conscientious in that way. And so my mantra has been on the road, Do not attribute to ignorance or to malevolence what could be attributed to ignorance. Do not contribute to malevolence what could be contributed to ignorance. And when I remember this, and ignorance, not just that someone's stupid, not that, but that they're unaware, that there's a lack of presence, there's a lack of knowing. And that's okay. I have ignorance, you have ignorance, we all have ignorance. And so when I tune into that, one, I'm immediately free from my judgments, my ego personalization, they're this, they're that, I'm better, whatever, they're trying to hurt me. And I am also much more capable of tuning in to that energy of love, particularly in the expression of compassion. Because I go, okay, if they just didn't see me, or they don't know, or it's their first season, maybe they haven't been able to afford winter tires yet, I don't know their story. So whatever they just did that scared me wasn't an attack. Maybe they're also feeling scared. What if it was my brother? What if it was my sister? What if it was my mom? What if it was my best friend? How would I feel? And just coming back to that place of love, like you mentioned. And it's liberating, because now I'm not driving yelling at everybody who's doing whatever, different from what I think they ought to be doing. I've now liberated myself into, this is what happened. And I have aligned, this is to the point of integrity, I've aligned what I believe my values to be with the actions that I'm taking forward in the world. And that's an act of honesty. It's also an act of courage, I think. When listeners are curious about integrity, it's not easy. It's not an easy road, because our truth, your truth, whatever truth is coming through for you in the moment, isn't guaranteed to be pleasant or well received by others. And that's kind of the point you mentioned before we hit the break too, Nitin, is that if we are willing to prioritize honoring our own truth and living in integrity with that, that promotes our capacity to love ourselves, because we haven't distanced ourselves from that authenticity. We haven't lied to ourselves or masked ourselves, and we're able to embody our genuine strength and open the doorway for that wisdom, Nitin, that you're talking to, because we are saying yes to what is real about us, rather than trying to conform it to what we think is acceptable.
Yeah, and I love that you brought in
Beautiful.
the piece around ignorance, and that can sound like a very harsh word, but if we take it from Sanskrit, the word is avidya, which it's like a lack of knowing, right? And we all have that. And there's something we can bring in really briefly. I don't want to go too deep into it, but it's the 5 afflictions of happiness, and this is from Buddhism. And the first one is avidya. It's clearing up this lens of ignorance, and then and these are how we can liberate ourselves. To what Oak's talking about is looking at our ignorance, lessening our ego, understanding what our attachments are, understanding what our aversions are, and then lessening our overall fear of death. So those are the 5 afflictions. It's ignorance, ego, attachment, aversion, and fear of death. And as you can lean into those are tools to become more liberated. And will we all have those? Yes, unless we become enlightened beings and we don't come back for another turn around this wheel, then okay, we've worked it. But for the rest of us, working on those progress. 5 can set you free and liberate you from so much pain.
Beautiful. Thank you, Nick. That's excellent.
And by the way, I know there's just one bit I want to add to that. Is like, and I'm actually curious to know, would love to hear your take on this as well, Oak and Nick. Like, I feel like, yes, we're talking about all kinds of concepts here, right? And our approach to life and what works for us and all the things we have shared today. And the 3 different ways of approaching life that we also shared in this very call, right? And listeners are welcome to choose and apply. And that still, I would say, at least for me, comes from a place of, and I'm sure you feel similarly, it comes from a place of still that we are constantly learning. We're constantly open to new ways of learning and doing things. We are not know-it-all. And yes, while we might use the word ignorance or not knowing, right, as a place, there are probably many places where myself, Oak, and Nick are probably ignorant today.
I got
plenty. Know. We do not know.
Me too.
And so we are learning. So I want the listeners to know we are not done by any means. We are just getting started on our own journeys. And frankly, if anything, the feeling I hold is the more I learn, the more I realize how much I do not know. We've just gotten to the essentials of, okay, we can learn. We've sort of figured out a way to keep this body healthy to some degree. We are in tune with our emotions to a degree, and we can be in tune with our emotions and to some degree of others. We're starting to scratch the surface on wisdom and understand, like, okay, maybe there are these higher dimensions. There's intuition, there's perception, imagination, all that can be used to create a higher good and well-being. But we are just scratching the surface. At least I am on those. And there's a lot we do not know. Frankly, I think when the two of you use the word freedom, and I think you may have said liberation, or I might have been thinking liberation, feels like this whole journey is that, it's just
Agreed.
Once we learn how to be free in our body, then we can have this access to this bliss that flows through our heart. We get freer in our expression through our speech. We get freer once we get our house in order and we have the finances. We have then the ability to choose what we want to do as a vocation and how to go about that. And other dimensions of freedom then present themselves. So I just wanted to share that. It's like, wow, like what an epic journey we're on. And there's lots we do not know. And this life is a continuous process in learning.
Nitin, I'm reminded of my teacher, Dennis, who's in his 80s and he's considered to be an enlightened master. And he goes, I'm just heating up. Like, I'm just getting started. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's, I'm just warming up, man. It's like, okay, cool. I didn't know we had that much time left together. He's like, oh, I'm just getting going.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of the teaching of the sacred spiral. It's like every time that we take a step forward, even if we revisit some idea or some concept or some lesson, we always come to it with a new set of eyes. It's like the idea that the man or a person cannot enter the same river twice because the river is not the same, nor is that person. This is this ever churning movement of the wheel, right? The turning of the Dharma, the turning of samsara in some senses, but this cyclical recognition that even though we attain some level of growth, of evolution, of insight, we are still children in the eyes of the universe. And I think that's something to celebrate too, because it helps us when we hold both the recognition of our limits and celebrate our growth. That can support the balancing of the paradoxes that we can face in life. It's like we don't have to get too aggrandized to say, oh, I've achieved, I'm a masterful, intelligent man, or I'm insignificant and have no way of ever reaching this higher level. It's neither of those, but it's kind of both of them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And learning to find that madhyamika, that middle path, speaking of Buddhism, is one of the pieces that has brought a lot of peace in my life. It's like, yes, and as the foundation of improv, right? Yes, and.
Yeah, I love that. I'm having a massive tattoo done on my leg, and it's pretty much what you just talked about, Oak. It's the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. But for me, what it's representing is there's this divine time and this divine experience, and then there's this human experience, and the tattoos culminating of them coming together. And for me, it is a reminder of those might be on different wavelengths. What I want in this world may not be happening because it's not in line with what the divine plan is. And holding both of those to be true at the same time in that paradoxical state. And then for me, what it ultimately represents is that the present moment is where those two come together, where the human and the divine come into one. And really, when we're talking about liberation, we're talking about returning to a oneness and in ourselves and with our connection and unity and being in yoga, being yoked in union.
Brilliant. Well, on the coattails of this enlightening and expansive conversation, I would turn the mic over to each of you for an opportunity to share with any of the curious and eager listeners who might want to connect with either or both of you more deeply. Where can they find each of you?
Yeah, folks can reach out to me on Instagram. Pretty active. I'm sure Oak, you'll put in the links. And they're welcome to check out our podcast as well, where Nick and I have, similar to yourself, just conscious conversations. We're trying to help folks create meaningful shifts in their lives in different aspects of life, whether that's leadership, love, health, purpose. That's our aim too, is we want to elevate the consciousness of the planet, just like you are doing, Oak, here, one meaningful conversation at a time. And if anything, as the last word that listeners can reach out as appropriate to either of us is, and this is coming from you, something I've learned from you, Nick, actually. Wherever we are is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It may not feel that way. It may not be enjoyable. It might be painful, but it's perfect in the sense that it is meant for our growth. It is meant for your next level of liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So you as a listener, whatever you've heard today, not all of it is applicable for you. Take the piece that's going to help you the most, use it, and apply it in your life. That's how you bring change about. And then, if you require additional guidance, if you feel like there's something you want to dive into deeper, reach out to any of us.
Yeah, love that, man. For me, same thing. Instagram, Nick Palladino-King, or my website, nickpalladino.co. Great place there to connect. Tons of blogs, tons of writings on wellness. Our podcast, Conscious Conversations with Nick and Nitin. And check out the episode we did with Oak, in the past 6 months or so. There's a great episode on there around language and mindfulness. So I would encourage you all to go check out that episode that we did in collaboration with each other earlier this year.
Excellent. And as always, all of the information will be in the show notes and the video description. And that concludes this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. Thank you so much for listening. But before you go, I have 2 invitations for you. The first invitation is to receive a free gift. I've created a free insight journal. This is a 30-day self-reflection and introspection journal that you can download at no cost in the description below. Go have a look and join the journey. The second invitation I have for you is, if it feels within your means and possible for you, then please head over to patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Becoming a patron will give you access to perks like behind-the-scenes footage and access to live Q&As with me monthly. You also get voting privileges to help pick new guests or to help guide other episode content. Truly, the support of listeners like you, paid or unpaid, goes a long way. So if you can like, share, subscribe, and give a rating on the podcast app, all of that goes a long way. Thank you to each and every one of you who's been on this journey with me. See you again soon.